That was just to wake me up. Thank you so much for bearing the cold and the wind and the snow and the whatever it was out there. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Edmonton. My name is Audrey Brooks. I'm your leader today. And I want to welcome you to a creedless church, a creedless community dedicated to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace a pluralistic philosophy, opening our hearts and minds to the diverse ideas, feelings, and expressions of the world community. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love, you are welcome here today. We respectfully acknowledge that we meet on traditional Cree lands, now part of Treaty 6 territory, a historic gathering place of Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Sioux, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. Is a crossroads of travel and trade. Many languages and cultures continue to enhance our vibrant community. We're glad to have you with us this morning and hope you find something in the service today that nourishes your spirit and encourages discussion. The Prelude is by Meredith Monk, and we're starting our program about risk-taking this morning with a risk-taker who took vocals and composition, filmmaking, choreography as a way to expand the understanding and possibilities of the human voice. For all those who came before, who founded churches and Sunday schools, who shared their faith through their preaching and teaching, for all those who fought inequality and cruelty, often at great personal cost, for all those whose faith fueled their work for a just world, may the stories of these few inspire us to find more stories and to create our own. Our paths are illuminated by this light of universalism. This was by Jacquelyn O'Sullivan from Let Us Now Praise Universalist Women. For our shared reading this morning, please join me. Risk anything. Care no more for the opinions of others, for those voices. Do not the hardest thing on earth for you and for yourself, and face the truth. For our chalice lighting this morning, we read words by Joanne Elder Gomes. We light this chalice for our foremothers, the pioneers who created kitchens and homes out of wilderness and unfloundering determination, the artisans who invented soup and poultices from plants, herbs, and roots, the wise women who brought babies into the world of the living and held elders in the world of memory, the teachers, preachers, and the wordsmiths who told the ancient stories behind desks, pulpits, podiums, and kitchen tables. May we honor these women who shared our faith and our convictions. We'll join in singing the first hymn, number 188, Come, Come, Wherever You Are. It is the tradition of the church to share our abundance as we take our collection today. And this month it's for the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists. The music that is being played as we take the offerings this morning is by Holly Near, who is an activist, a songwriter, and who comes forward for support to the oppressed. I had the privilege of meeting her when I was at seminary, when she was part of the protest against the death of a young gay man who was thrown into the Kenduskeag stream on the 150th anniversary of the Bangor town, the city of Bangor. So my first 3 weeks at that seminary were involved with Christina Wells and Holly Near and a bunch of about 1,000 people who paraded the streets of Bangor for the honoring the name of Charlie Howard, who was the person who was killed. Holly Near.
We are
Join us in singing the song, From You I Receive. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. There is a responsive reading in your order of service, a blessing for risk takers and failures. I'll read the first 3 lines, and I'll ask you to continue reading the responses. Blessed are they who fall in the mud, who jump with gusto and rip the pants, who skin the elbows and bruise the ego, for they shall know the sweetness of risk.
Blessed are they who make giant mistakes, whose intentions are good, but impact has injured, who know the hot sense of regret and ask for mercy, for their hearts will know the gift of forgiveness.
Blessed are they who have seen a D or an F or a C or any letter less than perfect, who are painfully familiar with the red pen and the label as less than, for they shall know the wisdom in the imperfect.
Blessed are they who try again, who dust off, who wash up, who extend the wish for peace, who return to sites of failure, who are dogged in their pursuit, for they will discover the secret of dreams.
Blessed are they who refuse to listen to the naysayers, for their hearts will be houses for hope.
Blessed are they who see beyond the surface of another, for they will be able to delight in the gift of compassion.
Blessed are they who stopped running the race to help a fellow traveler, who pick up the fallen, who stop for the injured life, for they shall know the kindness of strangers.
Blessed are they who wildly, boldly abandon women, for they shall know the path of justice.
This is by Reverend Robin Tanner, a Unitarian Universalist minister, poet, and activist, serves as the Minister of Worship and Outreach, Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Summit, New Jersey.
Thank you, Audrey, for all your fine work. We have a community question that we'd like to ask, and before I ask it, and you can read it, of course, I also want to talk about our youth who are this weekend taking a bit of a risk themselves. Almost our entire youth group are in Saskatoon this weekend, and they're taking the OWL course, Our Whole Lives, which is a course age-appropriate for their group, looking at human sexuality, at consent, at gender diversity, and all of those things. They should just be finishing up and heading back on the road, so we hope for a safe journey back. They're led by Maria and by Marilyn Gay, Maria Jenkins and Marilyn Gay, and they'll be coming back this afternoon, so let's keep them thinking too. But what I'd like to invite you now, as we consider this subject of risk for the whole month, is just turn to a neighbor, maybe someone you don't know, and talk for a couple of minutes about some point in your life when you took a risk. And maybe it worked, maybe it didn't work, but I invite you to share a little bit about what it means to you to take a risk. Are you comfortable with it? Do you hate it? Where are you at? Go ahead. Some week when I run dry and don't have an idea for a sermon, I'm just going to ask the community question and leave. And you'll all be fine. You'll all be fine. Each week we have a ritual honoring the fact that lots of things go on in our lives in between our Sundays together, good things and bad things. So we invite people to come forward as they will to light candles for care or concern, for joys or sorrows. And you can do this silently, or today you can speak to the candle. So first I'm going to invite up all those who wish to light a silent candle this morning. And if you wish to speak to your candle, just hold back and I'll invite you up in a minute or two. If you wish to light a silent candle, come forward now, please. And if you'd like to share with us your reason for lighting a candle, please come forward now. Connected in this world, that none of us really is as alone, even though sometimes we'll feel terribly, terribly alone. There are always people out there who are going through things, joyful things, sad things, challenging things, just like us. There is a world out there, and maybe they can help. Our next hymn is number 298, Wake Now My Senses. If you're going to take a risk, you better be awake for it. 298. A few months ago, the church switched their method of making employee RRSP contributions to a credit union. And so, like all the others, I had to go in and complete the meeting with the fund manager. And there were the inevitable questions about, are you risk adverse in your investments? How comfortable are you with some risk? Many insurance companies now describe themselves in terms of risk management. And so many schools and community leagues and recreation facilities, and yes, even churches sometimes, begin their business planning not with their activities, but with minimizing physical and legal risks. 2 weeks ago, I had to complete a 2-page legal waiver for one of my daughters so that she could go to a birthday party that featured curling. It included initialing statements such as, you could fall on slippery ice. You could fall stepping onto slippery ice. You could hurt yourself on a curling stone. And brooms can cause injury. We've come an awful long way from you pays your money, you takes your chances. There is a shadow over our society as advertisement over advertisement and policy over policy are filled with ever more cautious legal disclaimers. And when it comes to prescription drugs that you see advertised on television with all of their potential adverse side effects, it's amazing any of us ever takes another pill in our lives. Everywhere we turn, there are subtle and not so subtle messages warning us against risk whatsoever, like an overprotective bubble-wrapping lawyer parent. It is a bit worrisome when you realize that this land, starting with prehistoric migrations up until the most recent arrival of refugees from war-torn countries, has been populated by people who often came carrying nothing, risking everything on a chance of a better life among the nations that form Canada. The theme of this month's services is risk. We will look at the idea not as something we should always avoid at any cost, but rather as something that we sometimes have to do in order to achieve our goals, in order to fully become ourselves. Attaining the life we want involves risk. Attaining a dream or changing the world involves taking risks. Heck, being alive and human involves risk every day, whether it's stepping into a bathtub or stepping out of your front door. The question is not will we risk, but rather what will we risk and how much risk will we decide is acceptable. And today, later on in this sermon, I'm going to take a risk because this is International Women's Day week and I am a 62-year-old white privileged male. Saying anything is taking a risk on this subject. This is the Sunday before International Women's Day, an event we traditionally mark in some way, so let's consider the contributions of a couple of risk-taking women. Emily Stowe was one of the founders of Unitarianism in Toronto, and she became the first woman physician to practice in Canada. But she had to take risks. She refused entry into normal college and so went to a normal school and became a teacher for a while. But then she applied to the University of Toronto Medical School and was denied entrance because, as the dean said to her, "The doors of this institution are, and I hope will always be, closed to women." So she went to the United States, studied homeopathy in New York State, and then came back and began practice in Toronto. And it would be 10 years of solid medical practice before they finally gave her a medical license based on her experience and skill. Our current Governor General, Julie Payette, literally reached for the stars when she took her risk. Holding multiple degrees in engineering and gifted in music, she was one of just 4 astronauts selected from a field of 5,300 applicants. And she joined the Canadian Astronaut Corps. She learned to fly high-performance jets and then flew 2 space missions, including a stay on the International Space Station. That just singles out 2 women who beat the odds, but a look at any government house in Canada these days reveals a host of strong women who have found a way to succeed in what has traditionally been a man's world. A look at the business pages any day of the week shows more and more women making headway there too. And a look at the news section will show you women in agencies and women on their own who are standing up and insisting on being heard for what they believe. They all take risks. Now I want to look at 2 similar and yet very different movements currently impacting Canada and the world. And in both cases, they are about women taking risks. From an article, the Women's Memorial March is an annual event held on Valentine's Day that originated in Vancouver's downtown east side to call attention to missing and murdered women in that district. The event was initiated by First Nations women in 1992 when the body of Cheryl Ann Joe was found dismembered on the corner of Powell and Salisbury Streets. And the march became an annual event to protest the high numbers of women missing and murdered in that community. The event has since spread to other Western Canadian cities, including Edmonton and more recently Calgary. A 2014 study by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police found that nearly 1,200 Aboriginal women were murdered or went missing between 1980 and 2012, although some investigators believe the numbers are actually higher. End of quote. The Vancouver March began not long after the first of the modern land claims started to wend their tortured way through the Canadian legal system. And it was a response from a segment of our society that felt they were being underrepresented by this new activism. They were a group of women that felt that no one was listening to them, that no one cared about them. They had become throwaway beings and were often blamed for their own victimization. Government did not care. Police forces couldn't be bothered. They were marginalized because many, not all, led risky lifestyles. Officialdom often implied that they had no one to blame but themselves. And as we know, life on the streets as a drug addict or as a sex worker is often involuntary, often coerced. This must have only added to the sense of being throwaways. Now, if you think about organizing this march as taking a chance, well, I suppose you could try and argue that some of these women had very little left to risk, but that would not be true. There was a great deal of courage and dignity they had in standing up for themselves, and there was real risk. I was at that first march in 1992 through the downtown east side. I was walking at the back amidst a large handful of male allies. We were asked to walk at the back. It was not a grand turnout that day. It was cold and rainy. It was Vancouver. There were only perhaps a couple hundred people. It did not merit much notice in the media. The claims that these women were disappearing and that police did not care were met with typical rebuttals of every life matters and we investigate all crimes equally. But that was simply not true. Most often, when a woman went missing, no one noticed, except perhaps a couple of friends. Those first women marchers were taking real risks. They were calling out the police, mostly men, who had an awful lot of power over their lives on the street. Some of them were risking violence and retribution at the hands of their pimps as well. They faced the potential of arrest, sexual harassment, and violence for daring to stand up and say, someone's snatching our sisters, and we are at risk. And for nearly a decade, they were largely ignored. Police forces refused to pay much attention to their cause until the almost accidental arrest of Canada's most notorious serial killer in 2002. He would eventually confess to 49 murders, mostly of Indigenous women, many of them taken from those same streets in the downtown east side. Well, since then, things have begun to change a little. Police services now work with community groups and, yes, with ex-sex workers like the Centre to End Sexual Exploitation, CEASE, here in Edmonton, a group that we support each December with our Sharing Our Abundance program. They're working with relatively new laws designed to keep young kids, mostly girls, of course, from entering the life on the street. And it's had a positive impact. And as flawed as this has been, and it has been really and truly thoroughly fouled up, even the federal government's inquiry into missing and murdered women is at least shedding some light and airing some stories on the question of throwaway women. And it's all because a small group of disenfranchised, frightened women said, enough. Said? They yelled it, actually, for 10 years until people started to listen. Those women took risks, both for themselves and for the others in their community. Second example. 2017 saw the fast-rising momentum of another group of women standing up for themselves in North America and even around the world. Now, they too have been taking some risks. They too said enough is enough. They too upped the volume on long-standing grievances that affect women who have faced oppression and harassment. And I speak, of course, of the Me Too movement. Women standing up and calling out men, mostly, who have taken advantage of positions of power to harass, exploit, and sometimes sexually abuse women, mostly, working for them, who were working for them or who were hoping to get work from them. And today's news suggests that the Oscar show this evening is going to be more about the protest and less about the awards. I'm going to be watching. Now, perhaps the real beginning of the Me Too movement goes back a little ways to the election of a U.S. president who openly demeaned women, including his opponent, and who's been accused of several cases of inappropriate or even harassing behavior. Even so, he squeaked into the White House. It was a horrible turning point for many of us around the globe. Perhaps that was the last straw. The realization that their nation could elect such a man even when his scandalous indiscretions were so widely known. First, we saw the Women's March on Washington, where a crowd of at least 500,000 stepped out the door with their quickly knitted pink pussy hats, just a week after the president's own anemic inauguration. They were joined by over 5 million people worldwide in 673 local marches, including a pretty significant crowd who braved the freezing cold day at the Ledge here in Edmonton. I took my daughters that day, each wearing their own pink pussy hats. The 5 million women and allies gave voice to the outrage of the women who had reached their I'm mad as hell and not going to take it anymore boiling points. Perhaps that's where the groundswell began, that soon boiled over from the political to the entertainment arena, with individuals risking their reputations and their careers in order to stand up and accuse very powerful men of harassment and abuse. And those first brave souls both inspired and empowered hundreds of others to step up with their accusations. Now, the similarity with the missing and murdered women movement is clear. A segment of the population, almost entirely female, decided to fight back against the abuse they were experiencing. But there are a couple of pretty significant differences as well. The founders of the MMW were a true underclass. They had no voice. They had no power. They suffered racial and class discrimination as well as gender harassment on a daily basis for a long time, and few listened to them. The women who launched Me Too are different in almost every way, except in their experience of sexual harassment and abuse. They did not have to wait 10 years for a serial killer to be apprehended before they were noticed. They made headlines instantly when the first accusations were leveled. Many of these women have attained power and privilege, wealth and fame while working in a climate shaped and saturated by the kind of sexual harassment and sexualized ethos that they stood up and challenged. They had a voice, and they had the means to broadcast it. They were able to start the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund for women who don't have the means to face their accusers, and raised over $13 million in a matter of weeks, including $6.5 million from Hollywood performers, producers, and agents. The result is that Me Too has spread like wildfire since the first accusations were leveled against a prominent Hollywood producer in October. Now, this is a good thing. The action is long overdue. North America's easy acceptance of a social climate that classes women as less is well documented and has been tolerated for too long. We know of pay inequality, of glass ceilings, of dismissive and demeaning language in the workplace. It's well known that women have to work twice as hard and be twice as good in order to get half as far in the corporate world. None of that's new. We've been due for a change, and it's a good thing that the time is now, finally. But there's the shadow side worth noting. While we must take accusations seriously and appreciate the bravery of accusers, it seems that every accusation these days is taken as fact from the moment it is uttered. The consequences are immediate and often very harsh for the accused, before there's ever a defense. That's a bit scary, especially since this change has been almost overnight. What once was acceptable, if inappropriate, is now enough to destroy a life. Overnight. Well, that's fine to change the rules going forward. But what concerns me is the backdating. Not to last week, but to 20 and 30 years ago. I mean, rape is rape, no question. It was then, it is now, that's fine. But there are other softer areas of harassment that are still being hit with the same power. And actions, I believe, have to be judged in the context of their times. There were a range of behaviors in decades past that probably involved some of us in this room. The use of illegal drugs in the 60s and beyond, pre-AIDS promiscuity, driving while under the influence of any number of substances, and yes, sexual banter, sexual play, borderline harassment. These are things we don't do anymore. Many of us have learned of their destructive nature. Many of us have raised our consciousness. So, should we condemn ourselves for things that were okay, even if they weren't terribly smart, in times past? And I've talked with a lot of people, men and women, and they wonder if their long-ago lives could withstand the kind of harsh scrutiny taking place today. Most of us reading our Unitarian principles will throw our support behind MMW and Me Too, because we affirm the worth and dignity of all people. Certainly, that's where that principle leads me, and I am deeply satisfied to see this really serious effort to address harassment and abuse. It's the beginning of a great cultural step forward, and I applaud the risk-taking women who took to the streets and the airwaves to make their point. It was brave. It was honorable. But we Unitarian Universalists don't live by a single principle alone. The second is just as important. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. I am all in favor of seeing justice done. If abusers have broken the law, then we must try them. And if the laws are inadequate, then we must make it easier to prove sexual abuse and harassment, and we must make it safer for the accuser. But I'm not sure that simply accepting every accusation as fact is the best course. I am concerned that equity, that fairness under the law will not be served. And more importantly, I am concerned that a very few overinflated and false accusations offered for all kinds of not very nice reasons will destroy many of Me Too's gains. Women taking risks have always had a place in our country and in the world. They stood up and spoken in the name of those who couldn't, whether it was the famous 5 here in Alberta or an unknown sex worker on the streets of Vancouver. They deserve our respect for trying to make the world a better place. It is people taking risks, women, men, non-binary folks, who improve society by saying, this must change. And while the stretching of values, the challenging of old habits may make some of us feel uncomfortable, it is change that will ultimately bring us more justice, more equity, and more compassion. So let us work together, female, male, and gender unspecified, to make a better and fairer world for all of us. Amen. As we enter a time of meditation, I invite you to remain seated and sing hymn number 391, Voice Still and Small. Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain singing, calming my fears, fetching my tears through all the years, singing. The meditation this morning in words and music are the same. It's a song by Carolyn McDade, sung by the Sacred Web Singers, that includes Audrey Brooks, among others. But I wanted you to really savor the words. I thought they were important. So I'm going to use the lyrics of the song that we will hear afterwards as the words for meditation. You ask my name, which is no name to you who have no name for who I am. I am survivor beyond survival, who carries on, who passes on what is my name, which is no name to you who have no name for who I am. I am lover, she of 10,000 names, who passes bread from hoarded shells. This is my name, which is no name to you who have no name for who I am. I am dreamer, who dares to dream my name, who carries on, who passes on what is my name, which is no name to you who have no name for who I am. Let us embrace the silence together. Our closing hymn this morning is number 396. I know this rose will open. 396. I know this rose will open. I know this will burn away. I know this will burn. I know this rose will open. I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will burn away. I know this rose will open. The closing words by Jean Olson. Go boldly. May you be brave enough to expose your aching woundedness and reveal your vulnerability. May you speak your deepest truths, knowing that they will change as you do. May you sing the music within you, composing your own melody, playing your own song with all your heart. May you draw, paint, sculpt, and sew, showing the world your vision. May you write letters, poetry, biography, slogans, graffiti, the great novel, laying your bare words to love and hate. May you love, even though your heart breaks, again and again, until the end of your days. May your life be filled with possibilities for courage. I invite you to join hands, and we'll sing Carry the Flame of Peace and Love until we meet again, and then I invite you to remain for a few announcements.